I'm Daniel Steinberg, and you're listening to The Maggid Method, a new podcast about drushos. Today we're joined by none other than Rabbi David Wolpe. Rabbi David Wolpe is the Rabbi Emeritus of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles, California, where he served as senior rabbi for the last 25 years. More recently, Rabbi Wolpe is the visiting scholar at Harvard's Divinity School this year, and you might recognize his name from the news. He just dropped out of the university's anti-Semitism advisory group.
When I left here, people said, "Oh, Harvard." Now, people say, "Oi, Harvard?"
Rabbi Wolpe is also the Anti-Defamation League's very first rabbinic fellow. So needless to say, he's a pretty busy guy, and I'm really grateful for all the time that he gave me today.
Good. Thank you for making the time for this. Really appreciate it. I know how busy you are.
Oh, I don't even know how busy I am. It's been insane. But
well,
okay.
I can promise you that this I'm not going to ask anything about anti-Semitism, and
then I will find myself struck dumb. I don't know what else.
Yeah,
I don't remember talking about anything else other than anti-Semitism.
I know. It feels like it's been like that forever. I'm just hoping this will be a nice diversion for you. And I'm fascinated by the little that I've seen of your speaking. I've watched a couple sermons of yours, and I listened to the Art of the Sermon, the podcast with Yehuda Kurtzer and the Shalom Hartman Institute, and that was like I felt like a kid in a candy store.
Yeah,
it was so enjoyable. And I feel like we've never met, but I feel like I know you. Okay.
All right, I'm ready for you. Comedy. I grew up with comedy records, and comedy was a big part of my training.
Wow.
So,
where did you grow up?
Harrisburg, and then Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when we had David Steinberg come to the synagogue, he was astonished that I could recite all his old routines, because I had listened to them records again and again and again and again. So
yeah. Most people don't know he went to yeshiva. He went to, I think, in Skokie. I think he went to yeshiva.
I thought he was in Canada. Was it Skokie? I thought he grew up.
He's Canadian.
Yeah, I don't know when but he knows his stuff, and his Bible routines are very funny. So
yeah. People always wonder if I'm related to him. As far as I know, we're not related. But I watched your last sermon at Sinai. I guess it was kind of your swan song, your final one as rabbi. It was very clear to me that you had earned it. You had earned that intimacy. It felt very intimate. And so what I wanted to ask you was, what kind of things do you do to earn that intimacy? What were the most effective things? Looking back, what were some of the least effective things? How did you?
It's funny that the intimacy is often not something that you do, but something that you are called upon for. So somebody calls you and says, I want you to visit my wife in the hospital. It's not like I say, I should go do that because it will earn intimacy. But in the process of doing it, intimacy results. One of the ways that a rabbi gets intimacy is because you're there at such critical moments in people's lives. And so their hearts are open to you. And I think then, even unconsciously, you start to develop an affect of assumption that people will repose a certain confidence in you. And so they do. Because it's not, when someone does, it doesn't surprise me, or I'm not put off by it. And so that's part of it. And then I think the other part of it, honestly, is by giving something of yourself. If you're always remote, then you don't have you have a relationship, but it's not the kind of relationship that's going to motivate people to open up to you. And so I have found again and again that, weirdly, the people that I've had some friction with, after we make it up, after they apologize, I apologize, we both apologize, those are some of my closest relationships. And beforehand, you would have thought, the two of you will never see eye to eye. There's something in the vulnerability of apologizing that gives you the chance to connect.
Yeah. And in terms of being vulnerable from the stage, sharing parts of yourself with the community. I know that there's different schools of thought on that. I think perhaps your father was of a different school of thought than you are. What made
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say my father was of a different school of thought, but then my mother had a debilitating stroke, and it was impossible for him to hide from the congregation what he and my family were going through. And I think he grew a lot closer to his congregation as a result of that. And it's when you show genuine fear, worry, things you did wrong. When you show yourself as a fallible human being, that, by the way, you will disappoint and upset some people who don't want you to be a fallible human being, but others will be able to draw closer to you.
Is that where you learned that from, when observing your father divulge part of himself?
I'm not sure if I learned it consciously, but I think I must have seen it, and it certainly impacted me. And I also was of a different generation, right? My father told me that when he graduated, his teacher said, just do me one favor, never let anyone call you by your first name. And I grew up, I was at a synagogue with people that I had already gone to camp with. Well, there's no way they were going to not call me David.
Yeah.
Because we were campers together, for God's sakes.
Right.
And that's already, you've blown it in terms of any distance.
Right.
Campers together. So I think there was a more built-in intimacy in our generation than in previous generations.
Mm-hmm. Did it feel strange at first when you're opening up about things about yourself? Did it feel risky? Did it feel like maybe there might be some loss of I don't know, dignity or something like that?
So I think I've never thought about it this way, but I think there's a two-step process. The first hard part is thinking of yourself as rabbi. I mean, the first billion times someone said Rabbi Wolpe, my father flashed to my mind. I couldn't believe they were talking about me. So first you have to build up the distance of I am rabbi, I'm not David. And then you have to learn how to break it down. We used to joke, actually, in rabbinical school when I was teaching in rabbinical school, we used to joke that the students all of a sudden got a deeper voice as the years went along, because they learned how to be rabbi instead of being just who they were. And then you almost have to relearn being a person in a certain way. So yes, I think that is a process that moves both ways. You have to establish distance and closeness, because it's the same thing with any, I mean, we've touched on the issue, especially before we started, about comedy. It's like, they're not telling the jokes. You are. And so that creates a certain distance. You're there to do something for them. When you're a rabbi, you're there to do something for them. If there's no distinction between the two, then there's no need of a rabbi. So it's a kind of delicate dance. And what I would say is how right or wrong you get it depends very much on the rabbi, the congregation, and the individuals. Because some people will tell you that I was aloof, and some people didn't feel that. And it just, so much is in the interpersonal psychodynamics of the crowd and the congregation and the individual. It's all complicated. Life.
Yeah. It's not easy to quantify such a thing. It's sometimes it's the flash feeling that you get that it's difficult to actually articulate. Right. Yeah.
Like every now and then, oh my God, I'm really connecting right now. This is it. And the weird thing is you think you can design such moments, but the truth is they just happen.
Right. On the same token, you said you don't have people's trust just because you were ordained. Once you know each other, then you can work together. So maybe these are two sides of the same coin, but how do you build trust? We talked about intimacy, but trust and intimacy, are they two separate things by you?
Well, as a rabbi, I think, again, different congregations feel differently. in my experience, you earn trust, first of all, by showing that you know something. That is, Judaism is very much a tradition of knowledge, and you have to be able to say, I actually do know something. I didn't just whisk through all those years of rabbinical school without anything sticking to me. Second is you have to be able to communicate. And the third is, I think that you have to give people a sense that you take them seriously. And that's how you take yourself seriously and them seriously. I think that's how you build trust. But there is another piece to this that is complicated, which is they have to sometimes trust you about certain things. So, for example, my congregation is very pro-Israel. They had to trust that I was too very pro-Israel. Now, I could have been a rabbi who was perfectly trustworthy and intimate and all sorts of things, but if I had not had the same positions on Israel that I have, they wouldn't have trusted me. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's also about specific things that you care about.
And I was going to ask you if you build a trust member, congregant to congregant, or you build trust with the congregation as a whole?
Both.
Yeah.
Your congregation has to trust you because they want to be proud of their rabbi in the world, and that matters to them. And they also want to be able to trust you that when they speak to you individually, you won't discount them. You won't ignore them. You won't brush them off. And especially with a big congregation, that's a tall order. And sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes I got it wrong.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about some of your mentors in terms of speaking. Who would you point to as some of your influences?
Well, far and away, with like nobody even coming in a close second, was my father. My father was a wonderful speaker, had a magnificent voice, and grew up in Boston, so he had a slightly sort of Englishized accent that made it even more powerful. Knew a lot, was just, sitting and listening to him, it was a master class every Shabbos in how to give a sermon. And so I gained so much from him. But I also always loved to listen to speeches. I had a record of Churchill speeches that I listened to, I don't know how many times when I was a kid. And every time I would hear a speaker, I would notice how they were. And so I really appreciated speakers, whether or not I agreed all the time with their content. For example, Jesse Jackson, magnificent speaker. You might not like what he says, but that's separate from learning the technique of how he did it. And so I tried, but even more, I would say, second to my father, my education in oratory came from the fact that since I was a child, I was a voracious reader. So I had a lot of words, ways to combine words, quotes, anecdotes, bookishness sort of at my fingertips. And I think that I benefited from the fact that that is a rarer trait than I believed when I was a kid. And so it's, to some people, like, since we don't live in a very bookish culture, it's to some people surprising that I've read all these books and I quote all these people, but in a different world or a different culture, it would sort of be the norm.
Mm-hmm. So you say you had a lot to draw from. I remember you saying that said whether you're reading a mystery or a Jewish text, you're always thinking this is something that's right. grist for the sermon mill. Yeah,
all the time,
which is funny.
I'm sure that that's true. I think any performer who performs with words and with stories looks everywhere. And so it's true. I can read a novel. I cannot remember anything about the plot or anything about the characters, but I'll remember like one wonderful line that will just stick with me. And I don't know why that is, but it has always been true. And so, yeah, I can see how situations, sometimes they just strike me the way that they would strike a comedian, as I could make a joke out of that. I think that would fit in a sermon. And often, over the years, especially when you speak every week, you use everything you can.
Yeah, you're in a constant glut for material.
Exactly. So, look, for comedians, there was a time when you could do the same routine in 30 different places, but now once it's on YouTube, it's everybody is right. It's gone.
Yeah. So let me ask a little bit about your process. So you don't have a pulpit at the moment. Maybe you go back from time to time, but how did it work? What was did it start Sunday morning? Did it were things percolating weeks in advance? How did it?
So I'm a bad role. I really mean this. I'm a bad role model in this sense, because there were times, especially for particularly important occasions or when something I knew I had to speak about, there were times when I knew for a long time in advance and I would think about it and accumulate. But a lot of sermons that I did were last minute, because what I need for a sermon is the idea or the theme. And then I could just stand up and talk. And so there were times when I didn't know while I was walking over to the synagogue on Saturday morning what I was going to talk about. But I just trusted it would come to me. And sometimes it was better and sometimes it was worse. But it always did come to me. I was lucky enough that never failed. I never got up and didn't have anything to say, even if I really thought of what I was going to say during the Amida before the sermon.
Yeah,
which has also happened to me. Having said that, I think that is because of years and years and years of accumulating such a stockpile of observations and stories and ideas and so on, that all I need is a flashpoint to go. And for me, always the hard thing has been, what is it I want to talk about? Once I know what I want to talk about, it all sort of comes tumbling out of me. And the reason that I believe this is so, which I learned early on in high school, is they used to ask us to make outlines and then to write papers. And I couldn't do it. I really couldn't do it. What would happen is I'd make an outline of some kind, and then I'd write the paper, and the paper would be totally different from the outline. And I realized that I think by speaking.
Yeah.
And so for years, I would write the paper and then do the outline from the paper. And that is a weird way to work, but it is great if you have to produce a lot of sermons.
Yeah.
Because I would stand up and I would basically think in front of the congregation, but I was blessed that I didn't think with a lot of ums or ahs or pauses. And so that fluency was for me a real blessing. And enabled me to write a lot and to speak a lot.
Now, when you say you just have to know what you want to talk about, what the theme is, what the idea is. What about is there a specific goal in mind for every sermon? Do you have a specific point you want to make, or is there something you want to achieve?
I usually have a point or two that I want to make, whether it is to enlighten, to challenge, whatever. Sometimes there's a great interpretation of the Torah, and I like it so much that I want to weave the whole sermon around it. I remember one Shabbos, I was thinking, I had just read the day before about the Kotzker Rebbe saying, when Moses says, I stand between you and God, what he's really saying is the I, which is the ego, stands between God. Now, that's a sermon. You can add a lot of stuff to it, but boy, the power of that your ego is what blocks your relationship to God. There are a million ways to go with that. And so once I read that, I thought, okay, now that I know that, I will just get up and the sermon will come. And in fact, those kinds of observations that are so galvanizing and powerful enable you to speak to the congregation, and every sermons had different aims. Some were specific. I wanted a specific kind. When I gave sermons, for example, about kashrut, so I hoped maybe more people would keep kosher, or at least they'd have a kosher bar mitzvah or a kosher wedding or whatever. or when I gave sermons about Israel, that they would volunteer, contribute, so on. But a lot of sermons were just about deepening our appreciation of the tradition and of each other and of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you ever get up there? I'm curious if you had a sermon where you said, I'm not sure if I made any points, but I feel like I banked some emotional income with the congregation. I feel like we've grown together through the sermon or through some experience.
A lot of it, by the way, is because of laughter. If you can get your congregation to laugh with you, that creates a tremendous sense of their liking you, which is a kind of intimacy. Like, we like people that we laugh with. There's a great quote that I have used at a number of weddings, where W.H. Auden says, the poet, he says, "Of the people whom I like and admire, I can find no common quality, but the people whom I love, I can. All of them make me laugh."
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about that when you're giving a sermon, that you laugh together, that is very powerful. And then also, there are times when you give a sermon to one person, even though you're not giving it to that person. And I was thinking about this when you were talking. I remember there was a time when I knew of an incident of domestic abuse, and I knew that the abuser was going to be in the congregation, and I gave a sermon about domestic abuse. And sure, I was giving it to the congregation, but without his knowing it, I was giving it to him. And so sometimes it's because of something that an individual has done or not done. But of course, that's tricky, because you get the reverse too, which is you give a general sermon about how you shouldn't lie, let's say, just as an example. And then one of your congregants will come up to you and say, "Rabbi, I know you were talking about me." Even though you weren't, you had no idea.
Those you're talking to always think you're talking about somebody else.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
So it's a strange, intimate distance dynamic, because it's almost like, there's this wonderful Hebrew word, lahavdil. It's very different, but I'm going to compare it anyway, which is, it's almost like a sitcom in the sense that you're there every week. You're there week after week after week, so that there are people in my congregation who feel very close to me and feel they know me very well, and I don't know them at all. Yeah. But they feel like I do, because how could we have a relationship and he doesn't know me? Yeah.
I think Lucille Ball said something like that. She said, people see me on the street. They think they know me because they see me every Tuesday night, and they think they know who I am.
They think they're friends, and then they realize, oh my God,
Yeah. Well, also, I would imagine that part of the vulnerability that you are self-revelatory about yourself, that people feel connected to you in that regard.
Yeah, I think that part of this has to do with the fact that you really have to know that you're not better than your congregants just because you get to be the rabbi, And when I look at my congregation and I know what some of them have gone through and some of them have done, and I mean, they're in so many ways, so many of them are so much better than I am. I'm good at this. I'm good at translating the tradition for them and listening and maybe giving some advice and things like that. But if they feel like you think you're better, then you're dead in the water. I mean, okay, if you're if you're the Vilna Gaon, you probably can think you're better. But I'm talking about
right. You're a professional, you're a professional.
You're a pulpit rabbi. You're a pulpit rabbi guy.
Yeah.
So that's part of it too, is being willing to learn from the congregation creates an intimacy as well.
Right. There's that trust factor that you trust them. You mentioned humor, so I'm curious, when you use humor, we live in a kind of a trigger happy climate, and we got to be really careful about what we say. And how do you toe that line? How do you strike that balance?
So it's certainly different from what it was. I remember someone coming up to me and saying that a joke, and I'll tell you what it is, that a joke I had told, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, they said, where everybody laughed? You couldn't tell that joke today, Rabbi. And the joke was this. I don't know if I could tell it today or not, but I understood what they were saying. The joke, it was an old, like, Rodney Dangerfield joke, where I think it was Rodney. These two guys are at the Minion. They're talking to each other. One of them says, it's my 50th anniversary today. And the other one goes, "Ooh, you better do something special." He goes, "Yeah, I'm going to do something special." He says, "What are you going to do?" He said, "Trip to Israel." And he said, "Oh, that's beautiful." He says, "What'd you do the other anniversary?" He goes, "Well, the 5th, I did this and this." And he says, "And 25th, actually, we took a trip to Israel." He goes, "You're doing it again?" He says, "Well, it's time I bring her back." So that was the joke, okay?
Yeah.
But it was funny. It's cute. It's not,
Right. Right.
But someone said to me, that joke about bringing your wife back from Israel after 25 years? Can't tell that joke. And I thought, he's probably right. It would at least be cringy and
a little misogynistic.
A little misogynistic. That's right, exactly. And so you have to know both your congregation, how they react, how much they trust you, and also where the lines are. So that's absolutely true. And you don't have, obviously, it's very different from being a comedian. No one wants you to be edgy in pulpit humor. Pulpit humor is supposed to make people laugh, but not in a way that makes them uncomfortable, because that's not the rabbi's job. So I remember, to quote I remember my father telling me that humor was very dangerous from the pulpit, because if you make a misstep, you really can hurt people. And that's not what you want.
Yeah. And you said he was a kind of a song and dance man. He was an entertainer. Did he use humor?
No, his father was. His father was
your grandfather.
My grandfather. Although my father, I have to say, my father had a beautiful voice. I don't know that he was a dance man, at least not by the time I knew him, but he sang beautifully. And I think my whole family, the way you won, in quotes, I have 3 brothers. At our dinner table, you won if you made people laugh. That's how you won the argument, was if you got off the best joke. Mm-hmm. So it's very much in the ethos of the way I grew up. My brother, as I said, I have 3. My brother Paul just introduced me to someone on email, and he said, "This is my brother David. I'm funnier than he is." And that was like a very typical, that's exactly the way I would expect my brother to, and then I'm supposed to write back, "No, so it was very much in my family, the laughter, the love of laughter.
So would you look for a joke, or would you repeat it? Like, would you, insert joke here? Would you try to find those moments in your sermon?
If I could find a good joke, I absolutely would. And often it just came to me it isn't exactly a joke. It's a sort of natural, funny thing that would occur in the course of explaining whatever it was that was going on. If the Israelites are rebelling against Moses, and you just say, "And then the Israelites rebelled against Moses," and you say, "Again," it's not a joke exactly, but it's a way of connecting, that people understand that you understand that we're all discussing this together, as opposed to I am high on a mountain lecturing down to you.
Right. Let me ask you about, so this is something that is obviously different in conservative synagogues than, say, Orthodox, is that people probably have their phones with them on Saturday morning. Yes. So I'm curious how you manage that. Short attention span.
By tearing my hair out. It got tougher, especially after COVID, because before COVID, we were really, really strict. And I didn't use my phone at all on Shabbos. And then on COVID, we started to Zoom, and you had to have it. And so it became harder. We're pretty good about policing people not using their phones, or taking their phones out, or taking pictures with their phones. But it's hard. It's hard. Especially because it isn't so much the regulars. The regulars don't do it. But you have families for the bar and bat mitzvah who are used to taking their phones out at services, who are doing it perfectly unselfconscious. They're not hiding it. They're just doing it because, oh, look, there's my niece is up on the bima. I'm going to take a picture, and you have to let them know as nicely as you can. We don't do that here.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then when you're speaking, it's got to be distracting, seeing people, glancing down and
yeah, it is. But there are always distractions when you speak, when kids cry or someone walks out or someone walks in, but you just try as best you can to focus on what it is you're saying. And now, which is also different, you're aware of the fact that people are watching you online.
Right. You're speaking to a much larger audience.
It's a much larger audience, but it also makes you feel in a certain way more constrained because you know what you're saying is going to be there forever. And you can't just, it's less free. It is less free.
Let me ask you, I saw a video of Elliot Cosgrove in Park Avenue Synagogue. And so when he was addressing the congregation with his sermon, he was standing on the stage, no notes, no pulpit. It was just him, facing the congregation. And I noticed that you're behind the pulpit for the most part, that I could tell. You do have some notes. You're not tied to the notes, but they're in front of you. Yet your style seemed a little bit more intimate than his. And I'm wondering, did you ever think about coming out from behind the pulpit?
I have a number of times, but I like the pulpit. I've done it both ways, and I also used to teach when I would walk along the synagogue and teach for a while. I would say I have notes about half the time, but I like a lectern or a podium. Even when I go and lecture at a gathering or a conference or whatever, even if I don't have a single note, I don't know. I like the podium. I grew up with it. I'm used to it. So it's a style question, but I just do what I'm comfortable with.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you also about, in terms of when you get up to address the congregation, this is it's kind of like the prime time slot. You described it as a sitcom a little bit. Right. It's the show is starting right now. And there's this moment of connection that you want to make with people before you begin, without, you don't want to just launch into your content and have them feel talked at. You want to talk to them. What are some of the things, maybe conscious and maybe some of them are subconscious, that you do to create that connection?
I take a breath and I take my watch off, just to pause for a second before. It used to be that my watch was how I could tell. Now there's a clock everywhere, but I do that because I need to attune myself to what I'm about to do. And also, and I tell this when I teach speaking, which I've done sometimes with rabbinical students and also other groups in various places, you have to the reason you have to slow yourself down is right now I'm talking, but right now I am speaking. And speaking is a different cadence from talking, which is just like this. And if you talk just like this, you're not actually speaking. And the cadence sounds artificial in a conversation, but in a speech, it sounds natural. And so you have to slow yourself down to the cadence of oratory as opposed to the cadence of conversation. And that moment helps to do that.
To orient yourself.
Yeah.
You remind me of that joke, the joke about the rabbi takes off his watch. The joke?
Yeah, sure. I've used it many times, actually, when I take off.
One of my favorite ones. Yeah. So let me ask you about criticism. Sometimes, the speech maybe doesn't land well with people, or someone has something negative to say. What are some of the things that stick out in your mind?
The thing that sticks out most in my mind is not so much a specific criticism as the fact that no matter how tough you are, and I started off reasonably tough and I got tougher over the years. It's still remarkable. It's true on social media too. You get 1,000 likes and one person says something nasty, and that's all you hear. And so the most important thing about criticism isn't so much what people say, it is putting it in its proper context, and remembering that, a lot of times the criticism is about the person and not about you. So, I remember somebody saying to me, I did high holiday services for singles upstairs. And I remember somebody saying something to me along the lines of, boy, I really used to love it the way you used to speak up there. And this was years ago, and I still remember it, despite the fact that and by the way, lovely guy, have a wonderful relationship with him, never said anything unkind to me. What are you going to do? This is just the way we're wired. And so what you have to try to remember is, even if you remember it, to let it go, and also to not see that person as the person who criticized you, because it's unfair. One of the things, this is already in Kohelet, but we know it ourselves. When we hear that somebody said something negative about us, we all of a sudden forget that we talk negatively about other people all the time. It's just, how could somebody say something negative about us? So perspective is really helpful.
And what about some of the best feedback? I would imagine that probably some of the best feedback comes from actions people have taken. The morning that you raised a lot of money for Israel.
So many that was one. For speaking in general, really the nicest feedback is usually for interpersonal stuff. You really helped me through this. I got a letter. This is the kind of thing that really, I got a letter about 6 months ago from someone and says, you will not remember me, but 40 years ago, you were a rabbinical student, and I was in Israel, and I was hitchhiking on the side of the road, and no one would stop, and you stopped for me. And we talked for 20 minutes till you dropped me off, and I never forgot our conversation. And it meant so much to me. Because we never reach out to people who do that, I just wanted to let you know. And I can't tell you, that simple thing. That's why I always tell people to thank people who've helped them in their lives. It meant the world to me. And so I think it's the things you do for people interpersonally that you remember, and vice versa, by the way, the many wonderful things that people have done for me that I really remember. But I will also tell you, since I'm on a tear of self-congratulation, I will tell you my favorite compliment ever, just because of the phrasing of it. So when I hired my first assistant, she was very young, but of course, so was I, and one of the board members who had grown up in Iran, and maybe this is a saying from Persian, I don't know. He said, when Rabbi Wolpe first came here, I thought he was very young, but since then he has grown gray hairs for me. I thought that was such a great compliment. Now I've really grown them. But I always loved that. I thought that was my favorite compliment ever. He has grown gray hairs for me.
For me, yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I remember on the podcast you said that you rarely spoke for more than 10 minutes. And I went back and I took a look at some
10 to 15, I would say. Yeah. I think 10 to 15 is more fair, but yeah.
Yeah. So some of the more recent ones look like they're between 15 and 30 almost. And I'm wondering, is it?
Well, high holidays were always longer. I'm talking about Shabbat. High holiday sermons were almost invariably closer to 30 minutes. Shabbat sermons tended to be, if you look back through, and we have hundreds of them online for anybody who wants to look, they're between 10 and 15, sometimes under 10.
Do you ever go back and watch your old sermons?
I don't watch them, but sometimes if I have to write a Parsha commentary, I'll listen to them to try to remind myself of what I said on this Parsha or that Parsha. And the reason I have to listen is because I didn't write them out. But someone is now transcribing the sermons. So a book, which would be nice.
30 minutes sounds like it sounds like a movie to me. It must be so hard to when you're doing it, it goes by quickly, but I'm guessing.
Well, those, by the way, I think it's also fair to say those I don't do off the cuff. those I usually have fairly, I mean, I don't write them out word for word, but I have fairly extensive notes usually. And that's when you really have something, I mean, you save up what you really want to say to the congregation for, like my Yom Kippur sermon, my last Yom Kippur sermon was basically an apology for all the times that I didn't listen, for being a little bit of Luftmensch, a little oblivious with my head in the clouds, which is the way I always was. And I told stories from when I was a kid about that. So that you couldn't do in a minute or two. That you had to really tell people, I'm aware of this incident and that incident and so on. And those kinds of subjects, or the current state of Israel, or something that requires, it's a little closer in some ways to a lecture. That needs more time.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. In terms of your, this is something also that I don't see it as often in Orthodox synagogues, but applause, when you get applause at the end.
I never saw it until very recently. I mean, that came in really with the Persian community. I've never, and we used to stop people all the time from applauding. And I think, I don't know how it started. I think that maybe it started in Iran. I don't know. But the Persian community was accustomed to applaud after synagogue. I mean, after sermons. We tried to stop it. We did stop it for a while. But then what happens is, it happens in the Persian synagogue. People will come in for a bar mitzvah and they'll applaud. But I never, ever, ever saw anyone applaud my father's sermons. And for the first 15 years that I was the rabbi at Sinai, even with the Persian communities that came before I came, I never heard applause. So yeah, it's as strange to me as it is to you, but now it's pretty ubiquitous.
Yeah. What does it make you feel like when you hear it? I mean,
I don't like it because it feels like then it was a performance and not a sermon. But that's my association with it. So I don't like it when now, I mean, sometimes people will do it after the bar mitzvah speech or even their Torah reading, or I don't think it has a place in shul, but that's because I wasn't raised with it and I'm not used to it. What are you going to do?
Yeah. And then, of course, you got a couple standing ovations for some of the final speeches.
Right. And that was just a way of saying, that wasn't actually about the sermon. That was just a
salute.
We've spent more than a quarter century together, and thank you. So I was moved by those, even though I would be more comfortable without the applause and without that. It was just moving to see. So.
Yeah. How do you feel now when you sit in the pews as a consumer as opposed to producer?
So I used to say that I became a rabbi because I was bored in shul, and the one place where you're not bored is, if you're leading the services. But I actually find that, first of all, it's a tremendous burden off you to just go in and daven. And you can just daven. It's amazing. You don't have to worry about the page. And also, I find that shul is like the shower in the sense that there are very few places in society where you can actually let your mind wander. And, one of the reasons they say why people come up with all great ideas in the shower is because there literally are no distractions. And if you're in a good shul where you can daven at your own pace and there isn't constant patter that makes you feel this way or that way about what's going on, it has the same advantage, which is you can just sit back and, and basically let your mind wander and think things and connect, and it can be beautiful. I mean, always depends. It depends on you and on the shul and on the Shabbos. But yeah, I like
when you talk about being a congregant as opposed to being up there and the stress of it. Did you find yourself distracted after the sermon, not being able to focus, trying to come down from the stage and back down to earth?
Very hard. I found the bima very hard to daven when I was on the bima. I really did, because I felt like that was 2.5 hour, 3 hour performance, basically.
Yeah. I noticed something. It's very nuanced. I don't know if many people would notice it, but just because I've been up there and done it myself, that when you're about to start talking, wrapping the tzitzit strings around your finger, almost like, I'll use the word lahavdil, like rosary beads, there's a feeling of, it's that nervous
right.
tick that allows you to kind of anchor yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, just a couple more quick questions. I know your time is valuable, so let me just zip through them. In terms of your family, when you are self-revelatory, you divulge stuff about yourself and your struggles, and you, how does your family feel about it?
They're fine as long as I don't talk about. They're fine as long as I don't talk about them without clearing it with them, especially my daughter. I don't say things about my daughter unless I know that she's okay with it, or unless I've asked her about it. So, yeah, I mean, I'm careful about that. Yeah, that's like for me a separate realm. This is something that's different in my rabbinate from most, and my father too. My father rarely had people over for Shabbos, and I think I almost never did. I really kept the home and the synagogue separate.
There was a quote I remember from the podcast, and I'm going to get it wrong, so maybe you'll remind me about, was it your daughter that said, I like you better without your suit? Or was that it?
She said when she was little, she said, I only like you in jeans and pajamas. Yeah, because what she was saying is, as soon as I put my suit on, I become Rabbi Wolpe. And she felt that there's a difference between the public persona and the private persona. Like, I was silly with her, but I wasn't silly as Rabbi Wolpe. So that's, that kind of division she very much felt. But that's fair. And yet, I just want to say that the flip side of that is that she also knew that she got a part of her father that other people didn't get. And I think that also pleased her secretly,
Right. She had access to the celebrity.
Yeah. Right.
How do you decide what to talk about? What is sometimes you'll have a great Devar Torah. Sometimes there'll be a burning issue. Sometimes there'll be something going on in the congregation. What's the hierarchy? What gets preference?
The best advice I ever got, which sounds like a cliche, but it's profoundly true, is what Simon Greenberg said, who was sort of the dean of conservative rabbis in his day, when he told me, your best sermons will always be given to yourself. So if there's something that's really preoccupying me, I know that will be a better sermon than if I speak abstractly about something about someone else. And that's what I tried most of the time to do. If it was a public issue that was burning in me, then, Harezeh Meshubach, that's like the best thing you could do. It's touching them and touching me. But also, one of the things that you invariably find, and this is the basis of all comedy too, is the thing that's bothering me, it's bothering them too. It's always, the thing that you notice, and then when you bring it in front of an audience, that's all of them have noticed it as well. It's right. Also, it's writing. It's everything. It's that's human connection, and it's a function. It's largely a function of noticing and bringing forward that which other people have felt but haven't articulated. Emerson said that the thoughts of genius come back to us with an alienated majesty, and the point is they come back to us because we've had them too, but we just haven't said it the way they have, or noticed it to the degree that they have, or something like that. And so when you do that, it's when you really have made a profound connection.
Have there been times that you've ever, so forgive the term, but in comedy, we call a person a hack, right? A hack is someone who kind of panders, knows what the audience wants. Have you ever found yourself, in a pinch and, just,
Absolutely. I've sat down next to assistants and said to them, that was product. Product is just like something that you manufacture, and I knew that they would like it, and I knew that it was fine, and I knew that I wasn't. It's not something I would want on my gravestone. So yeah, sometimes you just do an okay job. No question. You're not always at your best. Nobody always gives 100%. So yeah, there are times when I just pander.
Yeah. What about changing what you were planning on saying because you got up to the pulpit and you either weren't feeling it or you didn't feel it, the vibe was right in the room?
Yes, absolutely. There have been times when I've altered right there what it was that I was going to say. You have to. It's the same thing with the wedding talk. When a couple is in front of you, you have to speak to the people that are actually in front of you, not just, and you feel it, by the way, when when rabbis do weddings and they read something that they've written a month before for the couple, you feel it in the same way that you feel that the professor's old lecture notes are being repeated. But I really tried very hard to actually see the couple in front of me and how they feel to me. And so even if I have one or two things that are standard that I'm going to say, I leave space, just like in a sermon, to say what feels to me the moment, which is a lot about being able to feel and read the room. I once was with another rabbi, I won't name him, not because he did anything wrong, but just I don't know if he wants this. And we were sitting with a cantor who was going on and on and on, and you could see the boredom in the faces of the congregation. And this rabbi leaned over to me and said, "That cantor has no court sense." And I thought, what a great phrase. It's exactly, he doesn't know when to pass the ball. He doesn't know when to dribble. He doesn't know when to shoot. He has no sense of court. And a lot of being an effective speaker or presenter is having a good court sense and a sense of the room.
Yeah. Let me ask you, what about, because this is something I've never picked up on, but I keep on hearing about it over and over. There's kind of like maybe it's an ancient phenomenon more than a contemporary one, but kind of a tension between cantor and rabbi. Is that something that
sometimes, but I've had nice relationships with my cantors. So, where
does it come from? What's
because
the
you share the same stage.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're not both comfortable in what you do, it can be hard. And also, I think it's intrinsically hard for cantors because people tend to put rabbis over them. And so depending on who the personalities are, that can be very hard. But I've been lucky. I really have been lucky. So,
yeah, and that's fascinating to me. I'm trying to remember. I think I saw a bar mitzvah invitation from my uncle. He grew up in the Bronx, and the cantor was I'm blanking. He became an opera singer, like on Broadway or.
Jan Pierce.
No, it wasn't Jan Pierce. It was. I'm totally blanking. I can't remember right now. He got out of his contract. He had an agent got him out of his contract in order to be able to go to Hollywood or Broadway. I forget. It'll come back to me, I'm sure, afterwards. But yeah, it's interesting. So Mark Saperstein, he wrote you referenced it a couple times. He wrote a book about sermons, history and methodology. How much did you draw on that, or is that?
It wasn't a book about sermons. It was a book of sermons from like hundreds of years ago and so on.
Oh, it was.
They were interested. Yeah, they were interested. It was classical preaching. There was the only thing that I got out of all the books of sermons. I mean, the two sermonizers whom I read with great profit. Both of them, by the way, recommended by my father, unsurprisingly, were Harry Emerson Fosdick, who was the preacher at Riverside Church in the, I think, 30s, 40s, 50s, and Milton Steinberg, who was the rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue, and I think probably the greatest American pulpit rabbi. And when you read, they're just rich and deep and wonderful. And I also want to mention that I used to drive around listening to cassette tapes of Harold Schulweiss's sermons. Harold Schulweiss was a brilliant, truly brilliant, deeply learned rabbi at Valley Beth Shalom for many, many years. Then did Jewish World Watch, the Chavurah movement. I mean, incredibly creative. And I also learned a lot from him. But what I learned mostly from most of them were like stories, bits, ideas that I could then recast. That's what I most wanted. I was mining for gold.
Yeah, so interesting. I'll have to look up some of those people. I lived in the shadow of Milton Steinberg because my father's name was Milton. So everyone always assumed when they see he write his name, I read your book, I read, so that was always funny.
He was remarkable.
Yeah.
He wrote a wonderful novel, the best novel that exists, I think, about the world of the rabbis called As a Driven Leaf, which is
Yeah.
about Ben Abuya, the rabbi who left
Acher,
the
yeah.
world. Yeah, Acher,
Yeah.
exactly.
So what's next for you besides what you're working on right now? And
I mean, I'm at Harvard this year. I'll be teaching next semester. I'll be writing, and I work with the ADL and the Maimonides Fund, and I'm still doing some stuff for the synagogue. I teach once a month at Temple Emmanuel, and I travel and I speak, and I'll see. I don't know. I don't know which of these strands that I will pull on will prove to be more enduring, but at the moment, I'm just looking for opportunities to have things to say.
keep up the great work.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Maggid Method, and I'm Daniel Steinberg. Learn more about the Maggid Method at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.